Hello and welcome to Starcraft. My name's Pig and I'm here with yet another video helping you learn and improve at versus mode. Today we're going to be talking about how to take engagements correctly. Out there on the ladder, there are a lot of botched engagements where people could be defending scary attacks or winning with their own assaults, but they're making some fundamental mistakes. So I'm going to go through each race one by one. We're going to talk about those fundamental errors and how you can fix them as a player to get much better value out of your army. Alright, so we're going to start off looking at a typical defensive Zerg engage that gets botched. So the Terran comes in, we start engaging his army with what we've got out at the moment. Turns out it's not enough units, they're getting absolutely hammered, and oh no, that's a lot of Terran units. We've actually got a ton of roaches building, but because they're going to pop out just a few at a time in front of the Terran units, and they're not all together, we see the Terran units basically engaging just a few roaches at a time, and gunning them all down. So our failure to consolidate our forces meant we took a terrible fight. But now we're going to watch what you're meant to do with your defensive engagements as Zerg in the second scenario. Exact same numbers, exact same position. This time around though, upon seeing the Terran, notice how we're pulling way back, all the way behind our hatchery. We're going to try and just buy as much time for as many units as possible to spawn before we engage. We're also letting him come deep on creep, so we might be able to pull off a surround here. Notice our units have started to pop out of those eggs. Only then do we engage. The reinforcements come in from the third base and the main very much around the same time, and we take a crushing engagement. So the big difference there is patience. You can apply this to all races to some extent, but especially with Zerg, it's a big issue players have. They're not quite ready to take a fight, and they just kind of run in, and the army values are terrible. Whereas if you just wait for one or sometimes even 2 rounds of units to pop out, you will turn that fight completely upside down and overwhelm your opponent. Next up, we're going to take a look at some aggressive engagements as Zerg and how those often work out. So often what we saw there in the early game was you're kind of building up, right? You're not ready to take a fight. Now we're looking at a scenario where we've been building army for a while and we would have loved to take an engagement. So we're out on the map. We're looking for an engagement. We weren't necessarily going to attack the wall, but now we see our opponent move out. We try to jump on him. We're going to try and engage, and we see he cleans us up pretty viciously. The problem there is we didn't pay attention to the positioning, and we actually attacked through a choke point. This time around, exact same scenario, exact same numbers, we're going to be patient. We're actually going to prepare a little bit of a surround. So notice we want him to come up the ramp into the open area. And now, once he's in the open, we come in, surround the army, and it's a completely different engagement just based off that patience. So as a Zerg player, remember, even if you're not using Zergling, Baneling like here, even when you're using Roaches and Hydras, you'll almost always have the shorter ranged army with these cheap expendable units, where if you attack from one direction, your army gets stuck behind each other, your units aren't as effective because they're not all firing at once, and they simply can't close the distance with your opponent's army quickly enough. But if you're patient, you look for those open areas to flank your opponent in. Oh, the engagements are so much better for you as a Zerg player. Alright, now let's take a look at Terran. Terran is a race where you've got a lot of high damage technical units. They've got great range, but they're very fragile and they're very weak if you don't take care of them. So early on in the game, it's very important to have walls. It's very important to have a good position. It's very important not to just have your units sitting out front your base, as we see here. This is a very common way that players do end up losing. As Terran, early game, those units out in the open, the enemy comes in with a random attack and we get rolled. This, though, is what your early defense should always look like. You should always be building walls on your second base, your third base, your main base. Put that siege tank on the high ground, dishing out the damage, and of course, always using lots of bunkers to make sure we're safe. Once you actually grow in unit count, you get up to more upgrades, more units, all of your damage, your ranged firepower complements each other, and you can start to launch some very powerful attacks. But you've got to make sure you utilize the terrain, you use the angles, you spread your units out, you siege them upright, and you don't just walk forward in a ball like this. Yet another botched engagement here, unfortunately, for the Terran player, and we get rolled by this Protoss. Let's watch the exact same scenario, how you should be doing it. Now notice we didn't scout ahead at all before. This time we're going to scan ahead of our army. We see where the opponent's army is located, and we're actually going to use Shift Command to tell those siege tanks to kind of leapfrog their way forward, siege up in a nice spread. We're going to spread out our bio so it can't get force fielded or knocked down by any splash damage, and we're just going to bait our opponent in with a small number of these Terran units. Suddenly you're going to notice all of these ranged units shooting at once. the Protoss units sort of trickling into this arc of firepower, and all of the Protoss units get gunned down, you know, continuing to just move those tanks forward with that shift command and spreading these units forward a little at a time to utilize maximum effectiveness. This is how you make your Terran units work. You pre-plan what angle you want to push on. You figure out, okay, I want to set up on this ledge with my siege tanks spread like so. You want to have your bio spread around it. You want to utilize the terrain, have a good angle, and if you set this sort of push up correctly, I guarantee you're gonna have a lot of frustrated opponents who cannot break through these sort of siege line pushes where you utilize your range, your firepower, and you don't let them just jump on top of you and crush your fragile units. All right, now onto the race with the most powerful units individually in the game, Protoss. You get these beastly, heroic units that are so incredible when they all get together and you form an army of Spartan-like heroes. But you've got to survive to that point, which involves not making a bunch of very, very common mistakes, like not leaving a unit guarding our wall against a Zerg, and this happens. Ugh. One of the worst things to happen, and one of those common ways we see players lose to Zerg, players especially, is forgetting to build a wall or forgetting to leave a unit on hold position in that wall. This can be absolutely deadly. If you have a unit in the wall, like here, we notice these Zerglings just can't get in, those short-range melee units, and this is just a super great trade for us as the Protoss. So this is your goal as a Protoss player. Don't give your opponent the opportunity to rush in with tons of these cheap, ineffective units. You know, if you limit the surface area, limit their ability to surround and isolate your units, you will survive. You will build up counts of these valuable, powerful units, and you will end up overpowering your opponent as the game goes on. We see another example here a little bit later, where we're going to see what happens if we leave our army kind of unattended out in the middle of nowhere. Whenever we're not sure what's going on, there's any chance of an attack coming, we should always have our army nestled somewhere up against a base near shield batteries, somewhere up against a wall with limited surface area. We don't want to leave it out in the open like this, or it will get isolated and shut down. So it's your task to make sure you're always using the terrain, trying to get behind your wall-ins, use your shield batteries. In this instance, we're going to wiggle into that mineral line where there's limited surface area. So all of these cheap units, the roaches, aren't going to be able to squeeze in there very quickly. Notice they're struggling to get in on top of the immortals, and the exact same numbers fight turns upside down when we babysit those units. So it's really a battle to survive. Let those hero units build up in count to where we take control of the game in the later stages. That's what you got to focus on as a Protoss player, ascertaining control over the early game by having wall-offs, having your units in pre-prepared safe positions, not just leaving them out in the open where what seems like a good game can turn into a loss very, very suddenly. Now, once you do get your unit count up, you can start to take control of the match. You get to be aggressive. And usually this is characterized by mostly units which are very simple to use, but usually you want to add one effective spellcaster into your army, which takes most of your attention. In this case, we see sentries at their best. Watching these force fields go down to launch a sort of barrier, cutting off about half of the Zerg army from engaging. Most of the Zerg units are stuck trying to just get into the battle, allowing us to engage a few units at a time and take an overwhelmingly positive trade. So the sentry is a very good early to mid-game spellcaster, but as the game gets later and later, it's harder to get value out of. It's also pretty advanced to use, so a lot of people prefer to go straight up to a little bit later in the game, where instead of using things like the Sentry, here we've gone up to Immortals and Archons, and most importantly, High Templar, ready to drop Psystorms. One of the most effective spells that Protoss players absolutely love, the Terrans and Zergs love to complain about. It is such a powerful spell. When you blanket it over your opponent's army, it just dishes out crazy amounts of damage and adds a lot of value. So as a Protoss player, in the early game, you're really treating each unit like a hero. You're kind of just trying to defend and survive, secure your position in the middle stages. And once you get there, it's about using a lot of these blocky, meaty units, the Immortals, the Archons, the Colossi, and focusing most of your attention on the spellcasters, which radically increase their value. Alright guys, that about rounds us up for today's video. I hope you're leaving today with a much better idea of how to defend, how to attack, how to take control of your games and get more value out of your army. This is something you learn incrementally with experience, but by applying these general concepts we've talked about, it should give you a really good stepping stone into enjoying that army control and not losing so many games suddenly because we're not getting that value out of our army units. If you guys want to learn more about micro, there will be an advanced or intermediate micro video coming out in the near future. Check out the full playlist of the Welcome to StarCraft videos for that one and a lot of other great tutorials. If you guys want to learn more about this game, feel free as well to drop by my Twitch channel, x5_pig or Pig Starcraft on YouTube. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Goodbye and good night.